circumstances, and I commend it to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Darian Fenton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Labor is supporting this bill, the Road User Charges and Land Transport Legislation Amendment Bill. It's worth recalling that the first reading of this bill was held under urgency way back in August 2013, and indeed I remember speaking on this bill at quarter to midnight, and some sort of a little bit of a rant about fast tractors, which seemed very amusing after we'd had a very long day in the House. So it is interesting that here we are, several months later. It was so urgent, but here we are on the second reading in March 2014. It does come out about, it is an unnecessary bill in the sense that it didn't need to happen in the first place. And that's why we have this bill in front of us, because basically the government made a stuff-up when it brought in the original bill, the Road User Charges Bill, which was passed in 2011, and came into force on the 1st of August 2012. But they left out of it. So what they tried to do then, what Jerry Brownlee and whoever was the Minister of Transport at the time tried to do, was to get the Regulations Review Committee to cover up the gap by bringing in a regulation that would continue the exemption for farmers who operate light road user charge vehicles for agricultural operations, and so vehicles such as tractors with limited on-road use. And the Ministry decided to introduce this pending outstanding policy decisions. So in other words, they put forward the regulation to the Regulations Review Committee even before the policy decisions had been made. In other words, the government had not done it in the legislation, and they hadn't even thought about the policy. But the problem was that the regulation was brought to the Regulations Review Committee afterwards. And so the regulation was made in anticipation of the policy position the government was going to take. Very weird. And it's got quite a saga to it, this bill, actually. And, the government left that bit out, so it meant these farmers with their mainly off-road vehicles carried on paying money, quite a lot of money actually, in road user charge contributions, yet the regulation was completely out of order. And so the Regulation Review Committee moved that it be disallowed. So what happened then? Well, the decision had not been made. The officials had stepped into the gap and tried to cover up for the Minister of Transport, and they put in this regulation. Charles Cheval, who was then the Regulations Review Committee chair, got up in the House with the agreements of the Regulations Review Committee. Remember, this is right back in 2012. Three of those members of who were National Party members who had actually agreed that this regulation to plug the gap in the legislation that the Minister had stuffed up in the first place, way back in 2011, they had agreed that it should be disallowed. But then the Minister decided that he wouldn't allocate House time to debate the disallowance motion, so the regulation was disallowed. In other words, it just disappeared, and it was overturned. The regulation was overturned, which is what should have happened anyway, and ceased to exist. But then what happened next? What happened next is the Minister wasn't satisfied with that. He reinstated the regulation. So he had another go with the Regulations Review Committee to try and plug this gap, And the Regulations Review Committee, who did an excellent job on this, said, well, it's not any better the second time. It's not any better. So it is a story of incompetence, a comedy of errors, a story of incompetence. The Minister introduced it the second time with no improvement. He should have amended the legislation, but he didn't, and he tried to get it through the Regulations Review Committee again. And so another disallowance motion was moved because it was no improvement, no better than the first time. So finally, as I said at the beginning, Mr Speaker, on the 27th of August last year, we had legislation introduced to fix this mess under urgency. It should have been in place for the 1st of August last year, but we had it introduced on the 27th of August, and then now it's taken several months. You know, despite the fact that the Transport and Industrial Relations Committee is an excellent committee and did their best, but there was no way that they could work in the haste that was needed and in fact retrospectively pass its legislation so we could cover up the Minister's mistakes. So, you know, it is a comedy of errors. It is a sad story about wasting Parliament's time. It's a sad indictment on the government, actually, because road user charges are a very important part of our infrastructure. Very important that we have road user charges so we can pay for the roads and make sure our exports can get around the roads and the infrastructure is safe and efficient. But also, I think that there are some things missing in our road user charges and our whole transport system that I just wanted to mention briefly, if I can. Mr Speaker, local roads, for example, local roads have been completely underfunded by this government. If you go to Gisborne, if you go to the electorate of Meka Whaitiri and talk to the forestry workers who drive logging trucks up and down those roads that are so dangerous. That's so dangerous now because local road funding has been underfunded. It's the same in Northland, actually. I wouldn't want to be State Highway 3 in Taranaki as well. So the government's got the balance wrong. Even though we support road user charges, we believe the government has got the balance wrong when it comes to transport funding. The bill... Just talking about the bill for a minute, the Minister has spelled out what it does, but I'll go over that again. It amends the Road User Charges Act to enable regulations to be made exempting road user charges vehicles from road user charges that are not required to be registered. We had 5 good submissions. It was very interesting, a long debate about farm vehicles. And trailers on farm vehicles. A bit of concern, as I recall, also from, I think it was the Road Transport Forum, who were worried about tractors who were actually carting trailers along, but not being charged road user charges. But it's fair to say that this is a reasonable thing to do, Mr Speaker, because most of the vehicles covered by this bill make very little use of the roads. And they make a sufficient contribution to the costs they impose on the road net through the vehicle licence fee. So the imposition of an additional annual charge for a trade plate or a vehicle licence is a cost-effective alternative to road user charges, and that's what this bill does. It amends the Land Transport Act to enable an annual charge in lieu of road user charges to be collected through the registration and vehicle licensing system where deemed appropriate. Owners of light road user charges vehicles that are operated almost exclusively off-road can apply to the RUC collector for an exemption under Section 40 of the Road User Charges Act. However, there are no offence provisions relating to the breach of conditions associated with Section 40, and the bill proposes to amend that Act to add offence provisions to support the enforcement of those conditions. There were 7 minor technical amendments. But going back to what I said at the beginning, Mr Speaker, Labor is supporting this bill. It is a necessary gap that needed to be plugged. It's just unfortunate that we had to go through such a long process, such an embarrassing process for the government. And thank goodness we have an excellent Regulations Review Committee whose job it is to scrutinise regulations and legislation, led by that very able member, the Honourable Marion Street, who did an excellent job after she followed on from Charles Chauvel, who also did a wonderful job, and thank goodness we have him there to keep an eye on the Minister of Transport when he tries to do things and tries to fix up problems without going about it the proper way. So thank you, Mr Speaker. Labor supporting this bill.
David Bennett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's good to hear the Labor Party is supporting this bill, and I just want to acknowledge the Labor members on that committee that do such a fine job there, Darian and others that have worked so hard to